Tunic is an isometric action game about a small fox exploring a big world, with secrets hidden around every corner. Some may require specific items or techniques to get to, but the vast majority are hidden because of specific camera angles or clever level design choices. Even many of the dungeons and intended paths that the game wants you to follow feel like secrets, through clever design choices and liberal use of breadcrumbs. The ruined atoll, located at the southern end of the map, is built in such a way that it slowly prepares the player to use the magic grappling orb, while sticking to this design philosophy that intended exploration should feel like finding secrets. When the player enters the ruined atoll, they are greeted by a large stone structure on a central island, with 4 smaller stone statues surrounding it. It's very clear from both the way that the camera moves when the player approaches it, and the central location of the structure, this is an important part of the level that needs to be examined thoroughly. When the camera zooms out, the player can see that each of the 4 smaller statues is connected to a different power source located at the corners of the map. The player needs to turn on these power sources in order to activate the structure in the middle. The northeast power source is located on a tall cliff, located right next to a large stone shaped like a frog's head. There's a large hook in its mouth, and a large hook on a pillar outside. Checking our map, we can see that this rock is the path to Frog's Domain, a new section of the map. It appears we can't access this yet, but the fact that it's a named location in our map, and it has a very memorable shape, makes it important to keep in mind. This is what Walt Disney would call a weenie, a memorable location that players will see from far away and want to visit. In order to access the southeastern power source, the player needs a key. This key is found directly behind the northeastern cliff we were just talking about. When walking behind the cliff, the camera does this dynamic movement that moves just far enough to give us a good view of the area behind the Frog's Domain rock. The area is mostly empty, and the camera doesn't show any other way to get into the frog statue besides the hook in its mouth. There's a similar, extremely distinct camera movement when the player finds treasure near the base of the frog rock. No explicit information is given through these camera movements, but it's obvious that these were deliberate, important camera choices that the player must keep in mind. The northwestern power source is not accessible by foot at all. There's no walkable path to the top of this cliff. If we try to walk behind it to examine what's located on the backside, we get grabbed by this frog's long tongue, whisking us from the base of the cliff to the top in an instant. This section could not be completed without this frog grabbing you. Even though this frog is an enemy, he gives an important piece of info to the player. Frogs have the power to move the player between different locations that you normally can't access. Once the player activates every power source, they can enter a portal that appears on the center island that takes them to a floating island in the clouds. The wide camera angle here helps show the scale of the building compared to the player character. In order to enter this building, the player needs something that can help them cross a small gap, as the portal leaves them just out of reach. Just like Frog's Domain, there's a hook where we want to go, and a hook where we currently are as well. So, we've encountered hooks, we've encountered strange camera movements near the foot of Frog's Domain, and we've encountered a frog that can pull us from one area to another using its long tongue. The logical conclusion to this is that we need to gain some sort of grappling ability to progress, and that it's very likely that it's located in Frog's Domain. Going back to the northeast corner of the map, we can investigate a little further. Behind the frog head, just out of sight of where the camera was pointing, is a ladder leading to the inside of the head. Going down into the depths of an underground cavern is very different from the open air and island vibes of the ruined atoll. As we descend, we start to run into more froggy enemies and continue to see many, many hooks. The game is increasing our stress by lowering visibility and decreasing the amount of space we have to work with, but is encouraging us that we're going in the right direction with these hooks scattered everywhere. The ability to grapple is located somewhere down here. We just have to find it. Once we reach the bottom of our descent, we are greeted by a well-earned save point and a bunch of frogs sitting in a hot spring. The player can definitely attack them outright, but the frogs won't attack the player first unless they get too close. It's possible just to avoid them completely. This introduces the main idea behind the Frog Domain's enemy placement. You can either fight your way through, or sneak your way through. For example, this frog here walks back and forth across this narrow hallway. You could fight him head on, or use the statues located near him as cover to sneak around him. The next frog the player encounters is circling a pillar. He can either be fought directly or carefully navigated around. This frog we see seems to be impossible to sneak around, unless the player notices this ladder to the right that allows them to sneak right by them. A large portion of the enemies in this room can be avoided, provided the player takes their time and examines the surroundings for places to hide or alternate routes to traverse. Awareness of both level geometry and changes in camera movement were necessary to enter Frog's domain in the first place. The game is rewarding players who continue to utilize this skill with easier fights. After exploring the area some more, the player sees an altar with a strange orb surrounded by a large swath of enemies. The player sees that the only way to access the altar is by jumping from a ladder that leaves them with no escape route. This is a tough fight with a worthy prize. After defeating the final enemy, the player can safely pick up the orb and see that it is the grappling hook that we were looking for. The movement is fast and snappy, and the player is given ample time to practice it before leaving Frog's domain for good. With grappling hook in hand, we can go back to the stone structure, activate the portal, and finally hook ourselves across. After being in the cramped, combat-filled Frog's domain, the warm colors, calming music, and wide camera angle that the library uses are a much-needed reward. The tension that has been building this entire time has finally been released. Through many breadcrumbs, clever camera movement, and smart enemy design, the developers of Tunic were able to successfully guide the player through the ruined atoll and direct them towards the Frog domain, where they continue to encourage the player to use their secret spotting skills to progress. They also were able to use compression and release techniques through camera movement to help create atmospheres that felt either comforting or constrictive to the player. This is just a fraction of the clever design choices that are made in Tunic, and I encourage anyone who hasn't played the game yet to give it a go.